Your dog's behavior the second you leave isn't what you think it is. You've probably imagined them sleeping on the couch, maybe wandering to the water bowl, perhaps staring out the window for a while before settling into a nap. That's the story most of us tell ourselves. It's comforting, it's probably wrong. Because what actually happens in the first 30 seconds after you close that door has been recorded thousands of times now, in study after study, and the pattern is so consistent it's become one of the clearest windows we have into how a dog's mind processes abandonment versus safety. Not all dogs react the same way. But the ones that do react, the ones that struggle, they follow a script so predictable you could set a timer to it. In 2015, researchers at the University of Lincoln installed motion-activated cameras in 46 homes. They didn't tell the owners what they were looking for. They just asked them to leave as they normally would. What those cameras captured wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. Within 90 seconds of the door closing, 68% of the dogs moved to the exit point. Not to the window, not to their bed. To the exact spot where the owner had just been standing. They sniffed the floor. They pawed at the base of the door, some sat and stared at the handle. This wasn't random searching. This was location-specific behavior, targeted at the last known position of the missing person. And it lasted, on average, 4.5 minutes. Then something shifted. The dog would turn away from the door, move into the next room, and the second phase would begin. Here's where it gets interesting. Dogs that were calm, the ones without separation issues, they transitioned into what researchers call maintenance behavior. Drinking water, adjusting position on a cushion. Brief moments of looking around, then settling. Their heart rate, measured with fitted monitors, dropped within 12 minutes to baseline. But the dogs with separation anxiety, they didn't transition into rest. They transitioned into vigilance, pacing between rooms, returning to the door every few minutes, lying down but not sleeping. The difference wasn't activity level, it was the quality of the stillness. A resting dog and a waiting dog look similar on camera, but their internal state is completely different. One has let go of the expectation. The other is holding it, minute by minute, like a breath they can't release. What most people don't realize is that your dog's reaction to being alone was shaped long before you ever left them for a full day. It starts in the first 8 weeks. Puppies removed from their litter before 7 weeks, according to a 2017 study from the University of Florence, showed significantly higher rates of separation-related behavior at 6 months old. Not because they missed their littermates, because they never learned the foundational skill of being near others without being attached to them. A puppy that stays with its mother and siblings learns something critical. Proximity is not constant. The mother leaves to eat. She comes back. A sibling wanders off. They return. The world is full of departures that resolve into reunions. That becomes the template. But a puppy pulled too early misses that lesson. And when you, their new anchor, disappear through a door, there's no internal reference point that says this is temporary. There's just gone. The way you leave matters more than how long you're gone. A 2012 study tracked owner behavior in the 5 minutes before departure. The dogs whose owners engaged in what researchers called pre-departure interaction, talking to the dog, petting them, making eye contact, showed more distress after the door closed than dogs whose owners disengaged gradually in the final minutes. It sounds counterintuitive. Shouldn't affection calm them? But what it actually does is amplify the contrast. You're fully present, emotionally available, connected. And then you're not. The sharper the drop, the harder the landing. Dogs whose owners began to emotionally withdraw, not coldly, just calmly, 2 or 3 minutes before leaving, transitioned more smoothly into alone time, because the shift was gradual. The nervous system had time to adjust. There was no cliff. Now let's talk about what happens in hour 2, because this is where the mythology really breaks down. Most owners assume that if the dog is going to panic, it happens right away. And if they make it past the first 20 minutes without destroying something, they're fine for the rest of the day. The data says otherwise. Researchers in the Netherlands used continuous heart rate monitoring on 34 dogs over 6-hour absences. What they found was that cortisol, the stress hormone, didn't spike and then fall. It climbed gradually, peaked around 90 minutes in, and stayed elevated for hours. Even in dogs that appeared behaviorally calm. Even in dogs that weren't barking or scratching. The physiology told a different story than the behavior. And here's the part that should change how we think about long absences. The dogs that were left alone for 8 hours didn't just experience more stress. They experienced a different kind of stress. Acute stress has a rhythm. It rises, it falls. The body recovers. Chronic stress flattens that rhythm. The system stops responding normally. And after enough repetitions, the dog isn't experiencing panic anymore. They're experiencing something closer to resignation. There's a behavior that shows up in about 30% of dogs left alone for extended periods, and it's easy to miss because it looks like calmness. The dog lies in one spot for hours, doesn't move much, doesn't vocalize. Owners come home and say the dog was perfect. But when researchers looked closer, using both video and physiological monitoring, they found something unsettling. These dogs weren't resting. Their eyes stayed open. Their breathing stayed shallow. They were immobile but not relaxed. It's a state called tonic immobility, and it's not peace. It's a nervous system that has stopped trying to solve the problem. In the wild, it's the last-ditch response some animals show when escape isn't possible and fight isn't an option. You freeze, you wait, you endure. And if your dog is doing this, if they're lying in the same spot for 6 hours barely moving, that's not a well-adjusted dog. That's a dog that has learned helplessness so thoroughly they've stopped expressing it outwardly. Here's something that challenges a lot of what we've been told. Crate training is often recommended for dogs with separation anxiety. The logic is that a den-like space will feel safe. But a 2020 study found that for dogs with pre-existing separation issues, being crated during owner absence increased vocalizations by 42% and elevated cortisol by 31% compared to being loose in the house. The crate didn't create safety. It created constraint on top of distress. Now, that doesn't mean crates are bad. For some dogs, they're genuinely comforting. But the idea that confinement automatically equals security, that's not supported. What matters is whether the dog has a history of positive associations with that space. A dog that only goes in the crate when you leave has learned that the crate predicts isolation, and no amount of padding or toys will undo that association. The space itself has become the warning signal. Let's talk about the one intervention that actually works and why almost no one does it. Graduated desensitization. It sounds simple. You leave for 5 seconds, come back. Leave for 10 seconds, come back. Gradually increase the duration until the dog can tolerate an hour, then 2, then 4. The success rate in clinical trials is around 80%, but the dropout rate is nearly 60% because it's painfully slow. It requires leaving and returning 30, 40, sometimes 50 times in a single session. It requires doing that for weeks. And it requires that you never, during that training period, leave the dog for longer than they can handle. Which means if your dog can currently tolerate 3 minutes, you can't leave for work. You can't run errands. You need a completely alternate care plan while you're building their tolerance from the ground up. Most people can't do that, so they skip ahead. They leave for 30 minutes on day 2. The dog panics, the training resets, and the cycle continues. But here's what that training is actually doing and why it works when nothing else does. Every time you leave and come back before the dog reaches threshold, before their nervous system tips into distress, you're adding one data point to their prediction model. You left, you returned, you left, you returned. Do that enough times and the brain stops predicting abandonment. It starts predicting return. And once that shift happens, once the dog's internal forecast changes from you're gone forever to you'll be back soon, the behavior changes on its own. You're not teaching the dog to tolerate your absence. You're teaching their nervous system that absence has an endpoint. That's not obedience, that's belief. And belief doesn't form from explanation, it forms from repetition. One more thing the research shows, and it's uncomfortable. Dogs mirror our nervous systems more than we realize. A study in 2019 measured the cortisol levels of owners and dogs, not in the moment, but accumulated over months, taken from hair samples. The correlation was striking. Anxious owners had anxious dogs. Calm owners had calm dogs. And when researchers looked at who was influencing whom, the direction was clear. The owner's stress was predicting the dog's stress, not the other way around. Which means if you're walking out the door every morning already worried about what your dog is going to do, already bracing for the damage you might find, your dog is reading that. They're reading it in your breath, your pace, the tension in your shoulders. And they're learning that your departure is something to be afraid of, not because of what happens after you leave, but because of what's happening before you do. You're teaching them that leaving is dangerous, not with your words, with your cortisol. So what does your dog really do when you're not home? Some of them sleep. Some of them wait by the door for hours. Some of them pace in loops. Some of them go so still they look like furniture. And none of those behaviors tell you whether they're okay. What tells you is what happens in their body. What tells you is whether they've learned, through hundreds of small repetitions, that you come back, that the door closes and the door opens. That absence is temporary, that they are not abandoned. They're just alone, and there's a difference.